This is the scope that I use on my Airsoft L96 sniper rifle. It's a Chinese clone scope, and I bought it purely for its appearance because it looks a lot like the types of scopes that the British military would use on their sniper rifles. It's a 3.5 to 10 power with a 30mm tube and a 40mm objective lens. And it looks great on the rifle. The optical clarity is good. It doesn't fog up, but it has a problem with the windage adjustment. Let me take you to the desk and I'll show you with pen and paper what that problem is. Okay, so I've drawn a simplified diagram of the inside of a telescopic sight here. Now, this is the erector tube inside. This is what actually moves inside of a scope when you adjust your dials to change your point of impact. It's actually moving this assembly of lenses here within the erector tube. So when you tighten the turret in, it screws into the body of the scope and pushes the erector assembly down. And then when you unscrew it, it moves out of the scope and the leaf spring returns it up again. It's the same thing for left and right adjustment. So under normal circumstances, when the erector tube here is centered in the body of the scope, equidistant from all sides, then you have equidistant adjustment down or up on the turret. So I've tried to draw this in this picture to show you what the problem is with this scope. What's happened here with this scope is this piece here, this windage adjustment dial, has been made the wrong length. It's not long enough. It doesn't protrude into the scope enough. So when it's screwed in all the way here on the windage adjustment, this piece here is only just long enough to push the erector tube into optical center. It should be longer so that when this has screwed in as far as it'll go, the erector tube has moved over to the side as far as it can go, or nearly as far as it can go. But that's not the case in this scope. The elevation seems to be fine. I can tighten the elevation down further and it'll move from optical center down. And then if I unscrew it, it'll move from optical center up. So that's all right, that works fine. It's just the windage that's a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the windage turret from its housing and I'm going to add material here. Now this is made out of brass and my plan is to solder a piece of brass on to extend it and then file it to length. And I'm going to do some measurements with the calipers to figure out how much longer this needs to be. So let's see what all of this looks like through the scope while you're adjusting the turrets. Now I've stuck a couple of sheets of A4 to the shed at the end of the garden and I've mounted the scope in a clamp, and we're going to have a look at those sheets of paper while I adjust the dials. Now this is to compare the range of adjustment between elevation and windage, but also what you'll notice is when I'm adjusting the crosshairs to the left, at a certain point the crosshairs will stop moving to the left, but you'll still hear me continuing to adjust the scope in the same direction. That's like a dead zone of adjustment that has happened because of that turret being too short. It's no longer in contact with the erector tube, so you can't adjust it anymore. So whatever the length of that dead zone is, that's the material that I want to add to that turret. Also, when the scope is all the way to the right, when the crosshair is on the rightmost edge of the piece of paper, at that point the scope is actually in its optical center. So really it ought to go further to the right. So, as you can see in the video, and what you could hear by the sound of the clicks, at a certain point the turret itself is no longer in contact with the erector tube, and there's no more tension on it, and that's why the sound of the clicks was changing. So I've loosened the grub screws on the exterior of these turrets, because these are the caps you'd actually turn. That one doesn't click at the moment because it's not attached, but this one is. And that allows you to return them to 0 once you've dialed them in. You can align 0 once you've got the scope dialed in, and then tighten it on, so you can always return back to 0. So let's take that off. There's a little O-ring around the edge here, and that helps to seal the scope and seal dust out. But here's the mechanism, and that's why the drawing might have looked a little different to how you expect. Your typical scopes, like hunting scopes and things, where it protrudes through the scope body, it's like it looks more like as you'd expect a screw to look. Now these work differently because of how they work. They can't move up and down, because if they did, this cap would actually keep opening up and closing like this. So this has to stay in place, and instead the threaded plug inside, which is the part that I'm going to repair, I'm going to add material to, that's the piece that moves in and out. So if I adjust it, you'll see it there. See? And then if I move it in. So at the moment you can hear now how slack that sounds, and even I can move this piece too, the exterior piece, because there's no tension on it. But if I just adjust him in, you listen, there's the tension. So now that's much more rigid. You can see I can't move it because the erector assembly inside is now contacting this, applying tension. So to remove this, I would just continue to adjust it all the way out until this plug comes out, and then I can show you how the drawing here, how this piece actually looks on the real part. So before I continue, I need to take some measurements. So I've set it so that the plug is flush. That's the plug that moves in and out as we adjust. I take a measurement with the calipers. And 0, of course, because it's flush. Now I'm going to adjust it in until it only just starts to contact the erector tube inside. You can hear by the change of the clicks. There. I can feel by the tension on it as well. So from flush, that goes down to 2.1 millimeters. Now from 2.1 millimeters, I'm going to continue to turn it in until it reaches the end of its travel. And remember, the end of the travel for the turret is optical center for this scope. It should be able to push the erector tube in more, but it can't. So let's measure how far it is from that. So remember, it's 2.1 mil. Let's see how much further it's gone in. 4.4. So it's gone 2.3 mil in further. So that tells me that the travel that it's traveling from optical center to this side of adjustment is about 2.3 mil, and the dead zone we have here is about 2.1. So that confirms about 2.1, 2.2 mil is what we want to add. I'll probably just add on 2 mil and call it a day. So I unscrewed this off a camera because it was a real pain to get out, and I probably did it the wrong way. I think the right way to do it is to actually grip onto the base of it here, this black ring here, and twist that off, and that's how you get it out properly. Let me pull this out and put the cap back on. Now put some electrical tape around where the grub screws are to create a seal, and then the O-ring is hopefully going to seal the scope to keep moisture and dust out. So that's going to be put aside for now. But this is that plug, that threaded plug that was moving in and out. And you can see the flat there. It didn't come across in the drawing because I was drawing it from this perspective, but it is a flat, and that's what prevents this from turning as the female part of the thread was rotating around it to move this plug back and forth in the scope. So I'm going to measure the overall length. This is how I'm going to do it. 23.4 mil. And that's what I'm going to be adding the 2 mil onto, so it should be 25.4 mil overall length. The other thing I've noticed is there's a slight, looks like where they've parted it off on the lathe, or they've left a little bit of a protrusion there, and I'm going to have to remove that to be able to make a flat. So I have a piece of hex bar stock that I'm going to use, and I've left it in the workshop, so I'm going to go grab it a minute. Stand by. Okay, here. I've got this. This is the brass I'm going to use to extend it. Now, I did go on eBay and have a look for flat bar stock, and it was, I don't know, like £5, £7 with postage, and I thought, I've already got some brass, so I'm going to try using this, at least try for now. But before I do that, I need to take measurements across its width here, just under 5mm, and across the overall length, just under 10mm. Let's have a look. That gives me some room to file down the width once it's on there. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to file off the point of this hexagon here and on the bottom as well. And then the distance from flat to flat will be the width to match this width here. There. And the thickness will be determined by how far I file this down when I take the points off across there. That's the plan anyway, so let's get a file and start cutting material away. So I didn't find any clever way of filming this, so I just thought I'd give you a quick look at what I'm doing essentially. I've got the point of the hex sticking up in the vise and the two flats of what the jaws are gripping onto, and I'm literally just filing off the point until I get down to the flats. I'm starting off with a coarse file like this with a safe edge. Don't really need a safe edge, but it helps to stop where you want to. And then when I get closer, I'm moving on to a needle file then. So I'll check back in when I'm done. It's getting a bit dark now, so I might carry on the rest tomorrow. So you got on the top datum line your whole little increments there, millimeters, so 1, 2, and then the bottom datum line is your half, and you can see it's over a half, and you can see it's on, so that'd be 2.5 plus the 20 here on the spindle or the thumb wheel thing, so that'd be 2.70 mil. So let's measure it towards this edge here. You can see the variation across the length. 2.74 mil. So if I was to rotate this the rest of the way for that last 0.5, the background is 0, and then that would make 3 mil. Now, that's pretty close, and I do understand that we're talking about scopes here, so this degree of error, as small as it is, will mean a lot when you're in terms of the scope's point of impact, especially when I change the elevation. But this is airsoft. I'm not worried about that. I'm not going to be working to that degree of accuracy. I won't be shooting to that degree of accuracy. So, yeah, that's the piece. I'm going to cut a piece off to length, and then it's going to be soldered onto here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this grub screw here and remove the clicker, because I don't want the heat of soldering to wreck the temper of the spring in there. So that'll be the next part. I've also got some solder that I've beaten thin with a hammer, so it'll lie nice and flat in between the two pieces when I solder it. And I've got a really ratty blowtorch thing here with cylinders that really ought to go to the they're going to go to the recycling centre after this, because they are not in good shape. Alright, let me just go, what was I going to do? So I'll go get that screwdriver set a minute, and then I'll remove this grub screw. I need to use a little bit of wet and dry paper just to refresh this edge. Oh, I forgot to mention, as well as cutting this to size, I also took the little blip off of the middle of there, so I could get a good, purely to get a good solder join here. So I'm going to, off camera, I'm going to cut this to length, polish the surfaces ready again and put some flux on them. I'm going to put that really thin bit of solder in between the two layers, and the next you see I'll have something on the table to protect it from the heat, and you'll see some heat going on this. So yeah, let's hope for the best. All right, here goes. That wasn't too bad. It did shift a little. You might have seen on the video that it shifted a little as the solder melted and it dropped. It kind of torqued and twisted a little bit. So it's not exactly true. I mean, if I show you that, yeah, you can see the turner edge on. It's a little bit skewed, but I think that's within range for me to file it. It should be okay. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to file this off camera because it's a bit of a delicate procedure. I don't want to go filing this metal here. And the trick I'm going to use is I'm going to mark all of the area of the original piece with Sharpie pen, so that when I'm filing this piece, if I slip or I miss and I hit this material here, it'll show up immediately and I can make a correction and then carry on filing. Yeah, just some careful filing to match the size. I'm just trying to match the profile that already exists there. It seems on there to be on there really strong. If I get right in there and really, no, I cannot get under there. I think that's on there for good. Nothing's getting that off. So I'll do a little bit of filing on that piece, and then I'll bring you, give you a quick little look, and then you'll see like a bit of a before and after. That's the file I'm using there. It's like a little needle file. Well, there's the result. The idea was to get it to 25.5 mil overall length, but I'm going to settle for 25.8. I don't want to mess with it any more than that, and I think that'll be just fine. If anything, I under-egged it a little bit. So, right, I'll take it out of there, and we can have a look at what it actually looks like. So I did, yeah, hang on, there we go. Right, I did use a little bit of wet and dry paper on it to level these surfaces, because I wanted to make sure that that was nice and parallel. Let me move it down to the paper so it knows what to focus on. That's a bit better. So those edges were nice and parallel because I was concerned it might snag where it goes into the body of the scope. But I'm pretty satisfied with that. I think it'll do just fine. I'll do a test fit, and if it fits well, the next thing you'll see is a test with the paper on the shed. So yeah. Well, that was a slight improvement. I'll be honest, I was expecting a better result, but I think I know what the problem is. I'm actually bumping into something over this side, and it is slightly better travel, but I was hoping for the same range of adjustment that I had this way to go this way. And I think what it's bumping into is the components inside the parallax adjusting dial, which is this one here. I didn't draw it in, didn't draw the details, because I didn't think I'd have to get into it, but here we are. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that, to be honest. I think I'm going to leave it here for this video and maybe revisit it later. I think I've solved the problem as much as I need to anyway. I've got a bit more adjustment to the right, and I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you still managed to enjoy it, even though it was a slightly disappointing result. It was disappointing for me too. But yeah, cheers, have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.